I would like Americans generally to know that we're the beneficiaries of enlightened political heritage handed down to us from that revolutionary generation, and it includes personal liberties and strictures on how to divide power and keep it from concentrating in the hands of authoritarians who think primarily of themselves. I would like Americans to recognize that we cannot allow that to be taken away. We cannot allow it to slip away. And we cannot be oblivious to this priceless gift that has been given to us, or the hundreds of thousands who've given their lives to affirm and sustain it over the past 250 years. That is not an outright political statement. It is a statement of the realities of who we are and where we came from.
Today's episode sponsor is Aditon, creators of Aditon Operations Kit, the military's go-to software for personnel and equipment accountability. AOK goes where you do, any network, anytime, any place. I got to know Aditon's co-founders, James and JJ, several years ago. They are former Army NCOs who have years of experience in the tech industry. They understand that most military jobs aren't performed behind a computer desk. Personnel and operations are distributed, but accountability of property is paramount to making mission. That's where Logi, AOK's equipment management software, comes into play. Formerly known as 92X, Logi is a next generation of equipment management for the military. Logi offers unrivaled features for military teams on the go. Ingest and digitize your primary and sub-hand receipts. Generate and share sub-hand receipts and DA forms with your team in just a few clicks. Capture photos, tags, and notes across your team to build context on the state of equipment. Get easy on-the-go access to critical property records. Logi is custom built for the modern military professional. It gives you your valuable time back so you can get back to the mission at hand at home or in the field. Whether you're doing monthly inventories or preparing for deployment, Logi is your pocket property book, giving you real-time visibility into equipment status and mission readiness. Logi is currently in use across the U.S. Army Special Forces, and it's expanding. For a limited time, listeners of the From the Green Notebook podcast can try out Logi for free. Visit aditonppc.com/FTGN-Logi to get started. That's aditonppc.com/FTGN-LOGE. How do I know what I think until I see what I say?
The Green Notebook, carried by military leaders around the world. Within those pages are sweat, tears, triumphs, and the hard-won lessons of life. Lessons worth sharing. Each week, the team dives into the notebooks of military leaders, business professionals, authors, athletes and coaches, and entertainers to share lessons and help you lead with the best version of yourself.
Welcome to another episode of From the Green Notebook. I'm your host, Joe Byerly, and this week during the Army's 250th birthday celebration, we're diving into the Green Notebook of one of the most respected military historians of our time, Rick Atkinson. Rick is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and the author of both the Liberation Trilogy and the ongoing Revolution Trilogy. In this episode, we reflect on the origins of our Army and the enduring values that have carried us from the Revolutionary War to the modern battlefield. Rick grew up as an Army brat and brings a deep personal connection to his work. We talk about what it was like growing up around the military, the legacy of George Washington, and how the DNA of today's Army can be traced all the way back to the muddy, chaotic campaigns of 1776. We also get into the weeds in the best way possible on topics like strategic miscalculations, the complexity of military logistics, and the underrated importance of reading and lifelong learning in leadership. So, as we honor 250 years of service, sacrifice, and transformation, grab your green notebooks and enjoy this conversation with the amazing Rick Atkinson.
Thank you, Joe. I'm very happy to be with you.
Rick, before we talk about fate of the day, I want to ask, you grew up as an Army brat. And so could you share a little bit about that experience? those experiences, growing up as a son of a military leader, and then how that's shaped your writing since then.
Yeah, sure. My father was from suburban Philadelphia. He joined the Army, enlisted in 1942 when he was 18 years old, and ended up coming back from Europe in 1946. His last job, he was in the constabulary, which was an armored cav unit that was responsible for imposing order on Bavaria, which had very little order after the war ended. And he went to Penn State and went back into the Army. He liked it enough. He had finished as a first lieutenant. He went back into the Army as a lieutenant and did a 30-year career as an infantry officer. And I was born in Munich in 1952 because that's where the Army hospital was. We actually lived in Salzburg. Austria was still partitioned. And so the first 3 years of my life were spent in Austria. And then, we followed the usual infantry officer circuit. First place to live in the U.S. was Fort Benning, where he was at the advanced corps, and on and on. And he retired in the late 70s. His last job was teaching at the Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. He died at the age of 94 a few years ago. And my mom also had been a Penn Stater, she was from Pennsylvania. And she was basically the dutiful Army wife, moving from pillar to post and picking up jobs as a teacher where she could and raising 3 kids. I think, Joe, it informed my native interest in the military, and partly because I know the culture, I speak the language, I know at least some of the acronyms. And I've always been interested in it. My father was interested in Army history, military history generally, and I think he infected me with that. It turned out when I finally was working for a living, I was a newspaper reporter, and people my age and younger had basically been exempt from the draft. The draft had been abolished. So remarkably few of us, my age and younger, had military experience. A generation older typically did. The great editor Ben Bradley, who hired me at the Washington Post, he'd been in the South Pacific in the Navy in World War II. My good friend Bob Woodward had been in the Navy for 5 years during Vietnam. But the fact that I knew something about the Army, I knew the difference between an F-16 and an M16, and I was immediately, first day, in fact, was assigned to stories that had some kind of a military bend to them, and ended up writing a lot about the military as a journalist, which I think helped prepare me to write about it as a historian.
No, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to get with it, but I want to go back. I just came from Bavaria. I was stationed there for 2 years. What unit do you remember what unit your father was in the constabulary force serving under?
The constabulary, he was in the 350th Infantry when I was born. That unit was in Salzburg. And he was in the tank company, I think, even though he was an infantryman. And the constabulary, I don't know my constabulary history as well as I should. It's a very interesting unit. The commander was Ernie Harmon, who had commanded the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Armored Divisions in World War II. Ended the war, I think, as a corps commander, had as much experience as an armor commander as anybody in the Army, including Patton. And my father talked about him. He's this barrel-chested, gruff character. My father said he was the toughest son of a bitch he'd ever met. I don't know that the constabulary was fragmented beyond just the constabulary. I'll have to look into it.
I was just curious. Like I said, I just came from there. I knew the 15th Cavalry Regiment had a constabulary force over there, and so did the 2nd Cavalry Regiment.
Uh-huh.
And so I don't mean to geek out on Army heraldry, but I just wanted to ask since you brought it up. But you wrote the Liberation Trilogy, and now you're 2/3 of the way through the Revolution Trilogy. Why the Revolutionary War?
I've been interested in it since I was a kid at George S. Patton Junior High School at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. When my dad was at Command General Staff College, I can remember getting interested in Benedict Arnold, not just the treason, but the man and he's the best tactical leader on either side the first couple of years of the war. And, my native interest in that Revolutionary Army and our Revolutionary period has been with me for a long time. Having spent as much time as I have writing about the military, latter-day military, both as a historian, writing about World War II, the liberation of Europe in World War II, but also as a journalist when I was a full-time newspaper guy, and I spent time in Somalia and Bosnia and Iraq and Afghanistan. I was interested in where that army came from, where the latter-day army came from. What were the roots of it? How can you find the bright line that exists between the Continental Army of the American Revolution and the force that we had in the 20th and now 21st century? So that's part of it. And always the characters mesmerize me, and the struggle, the existential struggle, and the part of the revolution that I think a lot of Americans don't understand is the extent to which it was a civil war. It was really our first civil war, and it had all the nastiness that's implicit in any civil war. So that has, I've been at it now for the better part, more than 10 years, and I'm gonna see it through to the end, Joe.
I hope so. I'm 2 books into it, so you've got me hooked. So you got to keep going for the third. But I was talking about your preface to The British Are Coming with a buddy over coffee this weekend, and in there you talk about how the Revolutionary War is our creation story. It's who we are. It's where we came from. It's what we believe. And he was saying that there's really like 3 foundational wars to like where we're at now. And in the way he saw it was like, the Revolutionary War was our origin. We solidified our values in the Civil War, and then we showed those values to the rest of the world in World War II. And I just thought that was a really interesting way that he captured that. And, going back to these books, you really see that, you start see, it's like you take away the crust, the marble, so to speak, of our founding fathers, of what we believe, and showed like what actually happened during that. And there was a lot of, it could have gone either way for a long time,
Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah, it is kind of a or 3-legged stool. I think that one of the things you see in the revolution is some of the foundational issues that have shaped our military and shaped our country consequently. So, for example, when George Washington becomes commander of the Continental Army and he shows up in Cambridge, just outside of Boston in early July 1775, there's a lot of things he doesn't know. He had been a militia colonel in the Virginia militia during the French and Indian War, always under superior British command. So he doesn't know much about artillery, even though he's the greatest horseman of his age, according to Jefferson. He doesn't know much about cavalry. He knows nothing about continental logistics because he's never run a continental force. But he does have certain instincts that serve him well. And one of them is that he must acknowledge repeatedly and with sincerity civilian control over the military. It's a fraught subject in the 18th century. Everyone in Congress knows about Oliver Cromwell. They know that it can go bad when you've got a popular general who's got ambitions beyond being a general. And so one of the things Washington does is in his correspondence right from that first week in Cambridge, he is acknowledging the primacy of civilian control, both to Congress, to state governors, to committees of safety. And that is a legacy that, first of all, he reinforced over and over again, that he embraced as president of course, and that he's handed down to us since then. So that, as you well know, there's not an officer in the United States Army or the other services who would even dream of a coup. You swear an oath to defend and protect the Constitution of the United States, and you actually believe it. You believe it strongly, and part of that is the heritage that you have inherited from Washington. So we find the roots of a lot of things that we sometimes take for granted today back in that revolutionary generation.
And as you covered in both books, really, like Washington made a ton of mistakes, but he was also a fast learner. And I remember as a captain reading George Washington and the American Military Tradition by Don Higginbotham.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that he talked about was Washington's penchant for self-study.
Yeah.
And, even when he was a militia colonel, he was constantly reading and encouraging his junior officers to read. Do you think that played a role for him to not only quickly figure things out, but also to kind of understand the importance of that civil-military relationship?
I do. When he shows up in Cambridge that day in July 1775, he's got a stack of books with him because he knows that he doesn't know a lot of things. So he's got the fundamental texts on laying siege to the enemy, which actually will be useful because he's going to have a siege of sorts around Boston. And he is a quick study. He recognizes that he has to have a good eye for subordinate talent, which he does. He shares that in common with some of the other great captains in our history. So he sees in Boston, for example, a 25-year-old overweight Boston bookseller named Henry Knox, who doesn't have a lot of experience as an artilleryman, but has a gift for gunnery and has an aptitude for math and the other things that you need to be a good gunner. And somehow Washington intuits that this guy's going to be the father of American artillery. He sees a lapsed Quaker from Rhode Island named Nathaniel Greene, who doesn't have any obvious characteristics that recommend him. He's got very little military experience in Rhode Island militia. And somehow he sees that Greene is going to become pretty quickly second only to Washington as the indispensable man in the Continental Army for 8 years. And one of the things these guys have in common is that they are autodidacts. They're self-taught to some extent. None of them have been to West Point. West Point doesn't exist at that time. None of them have been to college. So they're teaching themselves, and they're reading a lot, and they're talking among themselves, and they're basically informal study groups. And Washington certainly encourages this among his junior officers, this whole notion that leadership is a lifelong pursuit. And the last thing I'll say about that, when he first shows up in Massachusetts in 1775, Washington, he's from Virginia, and he's been appointed commander-in-chief partly because he's from Virginia. There's an effort to make the Continental Army really continental. In fact, it is basically New England militiamen, and this Virginian has been sent to command in order to bind together the colonies to act as a recruiting tool in hopes that Southern soldiers will join the cause and so on. And these are really men from different countries. They're not from different colonies, different states. They're from different countries. That's how they think of it at that time. And Washington doesn't have anything good to say privately about New Englanders. He refers to dirty New Englanders, and he really is contemptuous of the junior officers in the militia he inherits. And he's got to learn, and fortunately he does learn fairly quickly, that this mystical bond between leader and led is going to force him to recognize, acknowledge, embrace the sacrifices that these men are making to be at his side in sharing the hardships for the cause. It's important for him to realize quickly that they have left their shops, their farms, their families to serve with him. He's got several hundred slaves back in Mount Vernon taking care of business. In Washington's lifetime at Mount Vernon, there were at least 577 slaves. So when he goes away, and he's going to be gone for 8 years, he's only back at Mount Vernon once for a very brief stay late in the war. He's got people taking care of business for him. He's got an overseer. Martha's there for half the year and whatnot. These men serving with him don't have that. And he's got to recognize, and they've got to know in their bones that he knows in his bones what it is that they're giving up to share the fraught effort to forge a new nation. So that's part of the learning that's going on here, and it's an important part of the foundation of the Army.
Yeah, I want to. You mentioned, how Washington saw the potential in Greene, in Knox, in Hamilton, and in others too, Lee, and Benedict Arnold before he did his thing. But you also saw that in World War II, I imagine too, the Liberation Trilogy, where Marshall's seeing the potential in the leaders that would eventually lead the U.S. Army to victory. How important, now that you've watched it over 2 wars, you studied it very intimately, is that leadership trait to see the potential in subordinates?
Oh, I think it's the ball game in large measure. Marshall famously supposedly had a little black book in which he kept track of officers on the make that had caught his eye. I don't think there was physically a little black book, but he had a little black book in his head. And so, Eisenhower had a good eye for subordinate talent, but he is not appointing the division commanders, the corps commanders, the army commanders. That is basically done by Marshall with, advice and consent sometimes from Eisenhower and recommendations from Eisenhower. I think we've got 89 divisions in the Army in World War II, 6 Marine divisions, very large navies, particularly in the Pacific. And for the leaders of those services to be able to identify men who can act with initiative, who've got the capacity to inspire men to do their duty, and sometimes above and beyond the call of their duty, to have the organizational wherewithal, to have the brains. And I think it's important. We see in Washington, Eisenhower, others, big brains with organized for executive action, take responsibility, willing to make decisions, capacity for really great organizational strengths. So, I think without that, you tend to be a failure as a senior leader. It's not just in the military, but in the military, the stakes are never higher.
Right. And we'll go back. I was just curious, and we'll go back to the Revolutionary War now. But one of the things that you do in both books is it's not just the American side of the story. You cover it from the British side as well. And I know that you spent a ton of time with King George's letters. What are some of the things that you learned in doing that, and really diving in on maybe the side of history that a lot of us don't focus on?
Yeah. Well, I love talking about the British in general and George particularly, our last king. Yes, I think it's important to look on the other side of the hill and to understand what's going on in the enemy's camp and the enemy's capital, because you don't really understand how the war is playing out unless you see it from their side and understand it from their side. So, particularly in the second book, Fate of the Day, it opens in Versailles because we have to know what it is the French are doing. And we're in London a lot, and we're around Britain a lot. With respect to George, in late 2015, Queen Elizabeth II, the late Queen, opened up to outside scrutiny the Georgian papers, which she owned, and as part of a project to catalog and digitize the papers of all 4 Georges who became king in the 18th and 19th centuries. There's about 500,000 pages, most of them previously unpublished, most of them from the reign of George III, because he was king for almost 60 years. And I was among the first allowed in to take a look for a month in April of 2016 in Windsor, about 20 miles west of London, Windsor Castle, in fact, and that's where the papers are kept. So every day I would show my badge at the Henry VIII gate to get into the castle, and then show my badge again at the Norman gate and climb 102 stone steps and 21 wooden stairs to the garret of the Round Tower, begun by William the Conqueror in the 11th century. And there are the papers. That's where they're kept. George was his own secretary until late in life when he began to go blind. So he wrote his correspondence himself, and he made the copies himself frequently. So you have a real tactile sense of being in his presence. And the time I've spent with those papers and in other papers of the British, both in Britain and scattered around archives in the US, it has allowed me to, first of all, gauge him more as a monarch and as a man. He's not the royal brute that Thomas Paine called him in Common Sense, a polemic published in January 1776. He's not the tyrant that Jefferson calls him in the Declaration of Independence. And he's not the sinister ninny who prances across the stage every night in Hamilton singing, "You'll be back, and I will kill your friends and family to remind you of my love." That's not who he is. He is a constitutional monarch, a patriot king. He's a child of the Enlightenment. He's a significant patron of both the arts and the sciences. He's got a lot going for him. And we see in his papers, he's got 15 children through Queen Charlotte. It's a loving marriage, actually. She was an obscure, drab German princess when he married her 6 hours after they met. But we see him as a father and father of his country, which is how he thinks of himself. But we also see that he's making significant he's embraced strategic misconceptions that are really going to lead him down the wrong path. One of these is a belief that a majority of Americans, there are 2.5 million Americans at the time, 500,000 of them are enslaved blacks, but a majority of the 2 million white Americans are loyalists, that they fundamentally are loyal to the crown. That is not true. It's not even close. And this is going to be a presumption that's going to backfire on them over and over again. We also see that he believes, his government believes, majorities in both houses of Parliament, the House of Lords, the House of Commons, believe that if the American colonies are permitted to slip away, if the insurrection succeeds, it'll encourage insurrections in Canada, Ireland, the Sugar Islands, the West Indies, where the real money is, in India. And it'll be the beginning of the end, the dissolution of the British Empire, which is a relatively recent construct. This is wrong. He's just got it wrong, as time will tell. So, I think being able to study George's papers, his reasoning, his correspondence to his senior ministers, his correspondence in general, allows me to have a better understanding of what it is they think they're doing, waging war for 8 years across 3,000 miles of open ocean in the age of sail.
I'd like to introduce you to our newest partner, Roger Bank, a modern digital military bank built by military members for military members. Whether you're stationed stateside or overseas, Roger is designed to meet the unique needs of our men and women in uniform. I recently opened an account myself, and the process was incredibly smooth. It took less than 10 minutes from start to finish. Now, here's why I'm excited to partner with Roger. They offer high-yield checking and savings accounts, zero account fees, early payday, and automatic savings with Roundup Match. Their military-ready direct deposit form is even auto-populated and signed by the CEO, saving you time and hassle. Plus, you get free global ATM access, real person customer support, and they even offer accounts for service members as young as 17. Funds are FDIC insured through Citizens Bank of Edmond, so you can bank with confidence and peace of mind. Visit roger.bank to learn more. That's ROGER.bank. What was it like reading those 250-year-old letters written by George? Like, as you're, basically you're going back in time
Yeah.
to what they believed at that moment in time. What was that like?
Well, happily, he's got good handwriting. That's always a bonus for cursive on very fine quality paper, as you might imagine. Best paper a kingdom can buy, with a good quality ink that has lasted well for 250 years. You can see, I mean, you see that George is a very compulsive guy. So he not only dates his letters, he puts the precise time. So, 1:02 p.m., July 14th, 1778, or, 8:06 a.m. And so this tells you something about him. And you see his relationship with his senior ministers, notably Lord North, who's the prime minister. They've been childhood friends. North is a very capable guy in Parliament. He's a very capable minister of the Treasury. He knows how to run the empire financially. He hates being a war minister, just hates it, doesn't want to do it, tries to resign over and over again. The king won't let him resign because the king trusts him, knows that he's important in the House of Commons. Lord Sandwich, who is the First Lord of the Admiralty, he runs the greatest navy the world has ever seen. This is the third time he has been First Lord of the Admiralty. He's a very experienced bureaucratic infighter, and he's a very capable guy if you want to put together a 400 warship fleet in the 18th century. He knows everything from how cordage is made to how to preserve wooden sailing ships from being eaten by the worm that's common in warm tropical waters. You do it by coppering the hulls. He's a big advocate of that. It turns out to be kind of a war-winning technology for the British. And the correspondence that George has with these men, they're all men, because one of the reasons the war takes so long, is revealing about both him as a monarch, a constitutional monarch, and about these men who are serving him. So it's fun. I live in their world every day for years on end.
And now with you have the luxury of hindsight, but as you're reading these and you see that if we don't take this military action, we're going to lose the empire. I feel like leaders have made that argument now for centuries, and usually doesn't end well for them.
Yeah, I would say, Joe, first of all, war never goes the way you think it's going to go. It's never the way you wish it would go. Never. George and the government have been warned that these premises that they have are wrong. So, for instance, Adam Smith, the great political philosopher, wrote a seminal text called The Wealth of Nations, which economists still read and refer to today. It was published in 1776. And Smith, who's a Scottish thinker, says, you kind of got it wrong. You don't need this mercantilist arrangement where you're extracting raw materials from the colonies and you're forcing them to buy finished products, and you're preventing them from having industries that will compete with industries, whether it's hat making or shipbuilding or whatever, in the mother country. It doesn't need to work that way, that actually an international trade arrangement will get you where you want to go. Well, this falls on deaf ears, and it turns out to be quite true, as we see subsequently. There are others. William Pitt, later Lord Chatham. Pitt is the great hero of the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War, as we call it. He is the architect of victory for Britain over France and Spain. It is the creation of the first British Empire with the peace of 1763. Chatham, who's in the House of Lords at this point and near the end of his life, tells the House of Lords in one of his great orations, if I were an American, as I am an Englishman, and a foreign troop occupied my country, I would never submit. Never, never, never. His voice ringing out in the House of Lords. This is true. And I think there's failure by George and his generals. He's generally ill-served by the general officers he sends to America, and particularly by the commanding generals. They tend not to be up to snuff. And they don't recognize that there is going to be a level of resistance, not by everybody by any means, and not with the intensity that sometimes you would like, but there are resistance to British force of arms that is going to be enduring throughout the entire war. And they think it's, blows will decide, George says in 1774. And they think it's going to be a quick war, and the British firepower will intimidate the colonies, and that will be that. The rascals will be suppressed and maybe a few hanged, and we'll go back to business. Well, it's not going to be that way.
Yeah, there's it's the favorite aphorism that, there's war on paper and war in real life. And I think one of the great things you do in both books is the friction that goes into war. Like, you think an army is going to do a certain thing, and then you realize the army doesn't have the maps, it doesn't have the food. And so the logistical nightmares on both sides really come to life in both books. And, as a military officer, a retired military officer now, I have a great appreciation for that aspect of war, because that just adds a whole nother degree of complexity that a lot of people don't think about when they're, hearing the drum beats of war.
Yeah, that's true, Joe. I mean, Omar Bradley's credited with saying that amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics. And I'm always fascinated by the logistical aspects of it. I've seen it in action, seen how hard it is to wage expeditionary war in Iraq or Afghanistan or Somalia, even in an age when you have instant communications and you've got substantial global fleet, and you've got the ability to transport men and material by air. It's a lot different in the 18th century, where everything has to sail across the Atlantic. The British, again, underestimate the challenges of what's ahead of them. They initially think, and it's wishful thinking, that they're going to be able to be supplied in large measure by relying on buying food from farmers and fodder. They have 4,000 horses for a good part of the war. And 4,000 horses, I can tell you, eat 20,000 tons of hay and oats a year. That's a lot. Sounds like a lot because it is a lot. And it's very difficult to find that forage here in the U.S. It's very hard to find, to buy wheat, to make flour and bread. Obviously, gunpowder, muskets, opium, all the things that you need for an army at war have to come from ports in Ireland or England. And part of the reason for this is every time they venture outside their own lines, they get ambushed. It starts in Boston, when they're bottled up in Boston for the better part of a year of 9 months. And it continues. They're going to capture Philadelphia. That campaign is described in The Fate of the Day. And the Commissary General of the British Army, the guy who's responsible for feeding the army, writes home to the Home Office in London and says, everything we need has to be sent by you to us. We can't rely on getting anything here. Because if we venture more than 100 yards outside of our lines, quote unquote, we need a very large patrol protecting these foraging detachments. And it turns out, by very large, he means 3,000 to 5,000 men. That's a big patrol. And that's because they're in danger of being annihilated when they go out. And the Americans are on their home turf, and they do get ambushed a lot. So these are part of the challenges they've got. I'll mention one other factoid. When the British take New York in 1776, and they ask for 950 horses to help pull supply wagons and artillery carriages so they can go someplace. They want 950 horses. Well, London ships 950 horses. 450 of those horses die at sea during the transatlantic voyage. Because it turns out shipping horses anywhere, short voyage, long voyage, is hard. Horses are very finicky when it comes to sea travel. And one of the predominant noises of the British Army throughout the whole war is the splash of horse carcasses being tossed over the side after they've been winched out of the hold and thrown into the sea. This happens over and over and over again, hundreds of times in the course of the war. So these are challenges that are facing the British right from the get-go.
Yeah, again, military experience, you're talking about the great Atlantic Ocean between the two countries. I know just going, sometimes 10 miles away, somebody forgot a power cord, which will completely ruin everything that we're about to do. So I can't imagine that scaled over the course of 8 years.
Well, and because, you can turn around and go get a power cord or, look for it someplace. These guys, you're talking about 3,000 miles, in a good voyage, sailing from west to east, say from New York to Portsmouth on the south coast of England. It's 6 weeks, and it's sometimes twice that. Sailing the other way into the prevailing winds, it's frequently 3 months to make that voyage if you're not intercepted by rebel privateers, if Atlantic storms don't blow you to the West Indies. So it's, they need an enormous merchant fleet moving stuff. They need almost half of the Royal Navy protecting the convoys that are going back and forth because the marauders are out there. It's a big job for the British establishment.
Now, one of the figures that you introduce in Fate of the Day that, I took for granted. I grew up in Savannah, Georgia. I used to walk through Lafayette Square all the time. And I didn't know a lot about him. I knew he played a major role in the American Revolution, but I didn't realize he was this 19-year-old kid who was leaving his wife behind to chase glory.
Yeah. Well, lucky you coming from Savannah. A lot happens in Savannah during the Revolution. It's where Nathaniel Greene is buried. It's where Pulaski is buried. And it's where one of the most signal defeats for the American cause, a Franco-American attack on the British in Savannah, goes very, very badly. Yeah, Lafayette, he is a 19-year-old spindly redhead, one of the richest boys in France. And he gets the bug. He's inflamed with a passion for what he perceives to be the American cause, the cause of personal liberty and freedom and so on. He is told by the king not to leave France. His experience as a military man is he's been a captain basically in the equivalent of a National Guard unit on the far eastern frontier of France. It's not like he's got a lot of experience. Well, the Americans say, well, you want to come play with us? We'll make you a major general. And so against the king's orders, he sails from Bordeaux in 1777. He's got letters of introduction from Benjamin Franklin, who's the senior American diplomat in Paris, and Franklin is helping to ship these soldiers of fortune from all across Europe, across the Atlantic to join the cause. Some of them are competent, many of them are not. Lafayette is one of those who is competent, and he's important to Washington for several reasons. One, they hit it off right away. Washington has no children of his own. Lafayette becomes something of a surrogate son. Lafayette is, first of all, he learns English very quickly. He's got an ear for the language. He's studying English on the voyage to Georgia, or he comes ashore in South Carolina, and then goes overland to Philadelphia and joins the American Army north of Philadelphia. And he comes not as a haughty, I know it all, but basically is quite humble and wants to be part of something greater than himself. Well, that's something that, we can all recognize, and Washington certainly recognizes it. And he knows that Lafayette, even though he's angered the king by leaving France when he was not supposed to, Washington knows that this is a conduit into the highest levels of the French court, which is true. And it's going to play out over the course of the next several years, and it's going to pay dividends. And then Lafayette, he really wants battle command. Washington's not sure what to do with him. He writes to Congress saying, what am I supposed to do with this guy? He's learning English, but he's not fluent yet. And he's not got that much experience. Well, he proves himself early on. He's wounded at Brandywine shortly after he joins the army. And he proves his mettle on the battlefield, and he's going to be given division command early on. And again, he's going to prove, he's got the trait that Napoleon most cherished in his generals, luck. He is lucky. Washington's lucky. The best of them are lucky. And two, he's got the ability to get along with the other young officers around Washington, the Alexander Hamiltons, the John Lawrences. They all like each other. They all speak French, incidentally. They become close friends. And two, Lafayette has the ability to command American soldiers. American soldiers respond to him. And so he's going to be very important for the cause right up to the end.
Yeah, and I could be wrong, but I think you said that he changed his coat of arms when he was coming over. So he was almost the founder of the word YOLO, or the phrase YOLO. He changed it to why not?
Yes, he did. He amends he does it before he leaves Bordeaux. He amends the family coat of arms, and the family goes back, 85 centuries or whatever in French noble fashion. But he adds the motto Curnon, Curnon, 2 words. And it means why not, ? And that's kind of how he approaches life. And he does leave a young wife. They married when they were in their mid-teens. And he has a daughter. And he bolts from France really without saying goodbye to his wife. It's a marriage that is good. And he cares a lot about his family. But he's got this burning desire to go off on an adventure and pursue something that he thinks is important, not only to himself, but to the world. He sees it in grand terms, and he's not wrong.
Yeah, it was, again, I completely, I just got used to that name. And then as he's coming to life before me, as I'm reading Fate of the Day, and I'm with Washington. I like him too. Yeah. As it's 250 years, is our Army's birthday now. What would you want, military leaders and even Americans today who are picking up this trilogy and really diving into the myth of the American Revolution for the first time? What would you like them to take away from this book?
Yeah, I would thank you for that good question. I would like Americans, first of all, to recognize that the mythology is less interesting than the reality. That even somebody like Washington is heavily mythified, and the reality of Washington as a man and as a general is much more complex than most of us learn in school, and really much more interesting, as human complexity usually is. I would like Americans generally to know that we're the beneficiaries of enlightened political heritage handed down to us from that revolutionary generation, and it includes personal liberties and strictures on how to divide power and keep it from concentrating in the hands of authoritarians who think primarily of themselves. I would like Americans to recognize that we cannot allow that to be taken away. We cannot allow it to slip away. And we cannot be oblivious to this priceless gift that has been given to us, or the hundreds of thousands who've given their lives to affirm and sustain it over the past 250 years. That is not an outright political statement. It is a statement of the realities of who we are and where we came from. And I think that all Americans need to recognize what it is that these forebears of ours, and they're forebears whether your family came here 300 years ago or whether they came here, last month. They are spiritual forebears, and having an understanding of what it is they were willing to die for is important for understanding who we became and who we can become.
Yeah, I'd like to key in on something you just said. You said enlightened forebears. And, one of the things, as I've studied, Jefferson, Washington, Hamilton, Madison, all of our founding fathers, they studied history. They understood Plato, they understood Plutarch. Thomas Jefferson had a commonplace notebook, which he captured all these sayings and stuff like that were written in parallel lives and then in the Republic. And I think it's all the guys that were building this nation understood thousands of years of history. And like you said, what power does to people. And I love that they built a government to not look at the ideal aspects of human nature, but the realities of human nature and building our system of checks and balances.
Yeah, I mean, sure. The high-flying words of the Declaration of Independence written by Jefferson are aspirational. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. Okay, that did not apply to 500,000 black slaves. It did not apply to women. It didn't apply to Native Americans or indigents. These are aspirational, and we need to recognize them as such, not condemn them for failing to have a perfect union right from the get-go. I'm in Boston right now, and I was speaking last night at the Athenaeum, which is a fantastic club founded, I think, in the 1820s, and it has hundreds of thousands of books in it, and it has for example, the book collection of Henry Knox. Henry Knox had been a bookseller, so he knew books. And after the Revolution, he's going to be the first Secretary of War in Washington's cabinet when Washington becomes president, and he continued to collect books. And his books are in the Athenaeum. And I was right exactly to your point. First of all, it's a big collection. He's got a lot of fundamental texts from antiquity. And books on a wide variety of subjects, not just military issues, but political philosophy and Aristotle, Plato, whatever. I think that book learning was important to these men. Most of them had not gone to college. Most of them are self-taught to some extent. And one of the ways that you make your way in the world is to be curious about the world. And, there's no better portal into the world than a book.
Yeah. And, last question is it took you, I think, 15 years to write the Liberation Trilogy. How are we looking on this one?
I'm older and slower, Joe. It did take me about 15 years to do those 3 volumes. This one, I started in 2013, right after the final volume of the Liberation Trilogy was published. The first volume, The British Are Coming, was published in 2019. That's 6 years. This volume, just published this past week in 2025, that's 6 years. I'm kidding myself if I think it's going to be less than 6 years for the third volume. If I can get it out in 2031, and I haven't really started research in earnest yet, that's the 250th, the semi-quincentennial of Yorktown, essentially the end of the war, and I'll be happy if I hit that mark.
Yeah, I lied. One more question.
Yeah.
Is what have you learned? I guess what are you doing differently, if anything, in your research now that you've, as you've gained experience doing this?
Having spent all that time on World War II, I got to know the archives pretty well. It's a completely different archive for the American Revolution, as I learned quickly starting on this project in 2013. So the mastery that I had learned to some extent at places like the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, where the official records of the services from World War II are kept. And they're massive. The U.S. Army record alone, records from World War II, according to one scholar who had extra time on his hands, I guess, weighs 17,000 tons.
Wow.
It's a lot of paper. And there were 16.1 million Americans in uniform in World War II in a country of 130 million. Soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines were prohibited from keeping diaries because it was considered a potential intelligence breach. So they all kept diaries.
We haven't changed it all.
Soldiers being soldiers. And so there are vast collections of diaries and letters and, official records and unofficial records, unit records for World War II. Very little of that available for the Revolution. There's, the papers of the founders are well preserved and have been well curated. And there's a lot of stuff around, but it's a small fraction of what there was for World War II, and it's in different archives. So just one example, probably the best collection of British papers of British leaders, particularly military leaders from the Revolutionary era, is not in London. It's not at the British National Archive in Kew outside London. It's not at Windsor Castle. It's in Ann Arbor. Michigan, as you may know, was not one of the 13 original colonies. But there was a Michigan industrialist named William Clements, and he was also a collector. And in the 19-teens and 20s, he began buying up the papers of particularly British generals and statesmen from the 18th century. So the papers, for example, of General Gage, who is the British commander in Boston when the war begins. He bought them from Gage's family. The papers of General Clinton, who is the British commander-in-chief for 4 years, longer than any other general. Those papers are in Ann Arbor. The papers of George Germain, the former British general, who becomes the American secretary. He's kind of the Robert McNamara of the war for the British. They're in Ann Arbor. So Ann Arbor, you gotta go to Ann Arbor to see these papers, and they're beautifully preserved. There's a separate library in the middle of the University of Michigan campus for this stuff, and that's just that's the fact of life. So I've tried to become more expert in understanding where and how accessible the necessary archives for the Revolution are kept.
Well, Rick, thank you for your time today, and good luck with the rest of this research and wherever it ends up taking you over these the next 6 years.
Well, thank you for that, Joe, and I'll see you in 6 years.
Yeah, I hope so. I have to wait now for the third book. Well, have a great week.
All right, you too. Thanks very much.
You're welcome. Thank you again for listening to another episode of From the Green Notebook podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please give us 5 stars wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps us gain visibility and the opportunity to help more people on their leadership journey. Also, make sure you check out our website at www.fromthegreennotebook.com. There, you can listen to past episodes, read leadership articles written by military leaders from around the world. You can sign up for our monthly reading list email where you can learn about new books that are coming out, and our Sunday reflection email that comes out every Sunday morning. Is really short. It's a 2-minute read, but I guarantee you it's going to start your week off on the right foot. Finally, make sure you follow us on Twitter at FTGN Notebook, and you can find us on Instagram and Facebook by searching for From the Green Notebook. Again, thank you so much for coming on this journey with us. I am humbled by the opportunity to learn these lessons alongside you. So please join us next week for another episode of From the Green Notebook, where we're going to help you lead with the best version of yourself.
I came from the mud.